I'm not making any excuses for my behavior. I don't do drugs. I was not drinking. That wasn't the cause of this. This was me doing a dumb thing and doing it repeatedly and then lying about it. And that's all there is. I don't know the exact ages of the women, and I don't know if you do. I'm going to respect their privacy, but they were all adults, at least to the best of my knowledge. They were all adults, and they were engaging in these conversations consensually. I know that I never had any intention of having any interaction with underage women, and no information that I have now shows that I did. I love my wife very much, and we have no intention of splitting up over this. I am deeply regretting what I have done, and I am not resigning.
Joining us now is Melissa Harris Perry, professor of political science at Tulane University and MSNBC contributor. Melissa, please tell me that there's one big, eloquent thesis statement that makes the most sense of what happened today with Anthony Weiner.
Oh, I wish I could, but I got to tell you that really my husband and I have been reduced to being 11-year-olds making Weiner jokes at this point. So I don't know if I have an eloquent thesis. Obviously, I really did love the grid that you presented at the beginning. I think we need to think about this in the context of, kind of the ick factor versus the question of how illegal, if at all illegal, these activities are. But I think we also can't underestimate the potential impact of even an ick factor scandal.
When you say that underestimating the impact of it, do you mean for Congressman Weiner, or do you mean for all of our ethics and, I guess, sensibilities in terms of how much of this type of information about public figures gets considered newsworthy?
Well, look, let me tell you a little political story here. So there was once a candidate named Jack Ryan. He was a good-looking young guy in the Illinois GOP. He won the nomination of the Illinois GOP to run in 2004 for the U.S. Senate against a guy named Barack Obama. He had a good, strong candidacy and quite likely could have given that young state senator a run for his money. But he got caught up in an ick factor scandal. He had taken his wife to a sex club. She didn't like it. She divorced him. There was nothing illegal here. There was nothing deeply salacious, but it was enough for him to go out, Alan Keyes to come in, and Barack Obama to rise to the U.S. Senate, not just in sort of an ordinary electoral fashion, but in the way that ultimately put him on that stage in 2004 at the DNC and made him in part possible as a presidential candidate in 2008. Now, that was in part because Jack Ryan was not a good steward of his public life. And so what we don't know here with Weiner is whether or not his lack of stewardship over the reality of being a public person and needing to make choices that, maybe you don't have to make in private life, but once you're in public life, you have to make different kinds of choices. It could have reverberating impact that we simply don't know about yet.
And in terms of the ethics and the newsworthiness of all of this, the first thing that I thought of when I realized what Anthony Weiner was going to be talking about at that press conference today was the comparison with the Christopher Lee scandal. Very similar in the sense that it is online contact, that it is adultery of a sort, but it is certainly nothing criminal. We just heard Shauna Thomas talk about a potential investigation into ethics considerations as to whether or not he used any congressional resources. Frankly, I would just stating my opinion, that does not seem like the kind of thing that is ultimately going to get him in serious ethical problems with the House, given the other things that people have gotten away with in the House. And so this is sort of a matter of his public life, as you say, being sort of poorly stewarded. What made Christopher Lee newsworthy, I think, is that he resigned. Had he not resigned, I never would have discussed that story at all on this air. And so there is this sort of matter. You have to decide where the line crosses, where other people have a right to talk about this.
Sure. Look, the fact is that in the U.S. Congress, it's a big group of people, all of them wielding supposedly the same amount of power. So someone like Weiner has basically built up kind of political credibility, political power that he uses for the good of his ideology, for the good of his party, and for the good of his constituents. And he has spent every single cent of that political capital on a sort of icky sex scandal. That is what's happened. So maybe he has not violated any laws or even, as he said, the oath he took against or relative to the Constitution. But the fact is he has made himself a significantly less effective spokesperson for all of the issues and all of the constituents that he cares about. And in that, I do believe that it is fundamentally newsworthy. Look, I've been reading about FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt because I was, prepping for a class I'm going to teach on America's First Ladies. And the fact is that questions of extramarital affairs, and they're deeply human, complex anxieties. They go way back in our history. But the fact is that in this new media environment, to be a steward of your constituents' interests requires, in part, making choices in your private life that can be displayed in a way that is respectable by the standards of our kind of contemporary political and social norms.
See, I feel like I agree with you, and that all totally makes sense for me. And viscerally, I believe in people's right to be icky.
Yes, of
as
course.
long as they're not victimizing anybody, and as long as they're not being hypocritical. But I think you're right that the way to measure its impact is to talk about the way it detracts from their ability to speak up for things that they want paid attention to. I think
yes,
that's right.
absolutely. Yeah, look, I believe in how. Look, I am descended from Mormon ancestors, and I had Mormon ancestors who were imprisoned for consensual bigamy, and I've always had a lot of anxiety about that because my sense is, look, if people are as adults making a choice to be in complicated marriages, what does the state have to say about that? But the fact is, the state has a lot to say on questions of marriage. If it didn't, then we would have marriage equality in this country. There is, in fact, a very strong sense that although, Anthony Weiner is not sort of a family values guy, but in choosing the option of presumably monogamous heterosexual marriage, he does signal that he is behaving with a certain set of practices, and he's signaling that to his constituency. And the fact is, it just opens him up for exactly this kind of, this kind of scrutiny. Yes, everybody has a right to be icky in the context of consent. On the other hand, the public also will, whether we like it or not, exercise their right to know.
The right to be icked.
To be icked.
Melissa Harrisberry, professor of political science at Tulane, MSNBC contributor, and person about whom I just enjoyed discussing all sorts of topics that I wouldn't like to talk to other people about.
Yes.
Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate it. All right. On a day when